Hey guys, it's Kevin again this morning for Hannibal, Season 3, Episode 8, The Great Red Dragon. And wow, what an amazing episode. I mean, something all about Hannibal is that this show could have easily ended with last week's episode, but no, they have to continue the story. They want to get to the point of the show that we all know, which is the Red Dragon. And finally, we are on that point of the show. And this really felt like a back to basics episode of Hannibal, like how these last few episodes kind of felt like a different kind of show. This really felt like back to basics, and I really did love that. I thought that was really great. Um, and everything about this episode I absolutely loved. This episode was to take place 3 years later, which we will get into. But let's just get into this episode. It was absolutely amazing. I loved every minute of it, and I can't wait for the rest of the season. It's going to be amazing, and probably the rest of the series because there's no way this is getting renewed for a season 4. There's just no way. So Francis Dollaride, who's going to become the Red Dragon, we meet him. He sits at this table, and he comes across a Time magazine article about the Great Red Dragon. Now, let me tell you guys something. He doesn't have one line this entire episode. Creep me the fuck out, and that's awesome. And that he finds this painting made by William Blake called The Great Red Dragon. And he looks at the article in his attic, and he works out, but can't stop thinking about the painting. Like, he has this obsession with the painting. We don't know what it is, but he has an obsession with it. He even eventually gets the painting tattooed on his back, and he purchases fake teeth. You know that this guy, there's something disturbing about him. You don't know what it is, but you know there's something about him. And as Hannibal's taken away by the FBI, he imagines himself in church listening to a boy sing, and basically that was how the episode began. I thought that was a great way to start it. I love that montage with Francis. I mean, right away, he barely says a word, but you're right away creeped out by him, and that's something I think is awesome, the way they handled that. So then we get this great montage of Hannibal, because as we know, he surrendered to the FBI, which you have to remember that he did surrender. He imagined himself in church listening to a boy sing Hallelujah, and it's kind of like, to me, that kind of seemed like Hannibal's finally bringing himself at peace. Like, now that he's turned himself in, things are going to be a lot more peaceful. And we see an article about Hannibal finally being caught. They take him to a mental institution where he'll be locked up for the rest of his life, and basically that was that. So then we go 3 years later, and I like that the show didn't start 3 years later. It actually had some stuff to catch up on what happened, and then went to 3 years later. So that I thought was really good. So Hannibal drinks alcohol, and it's a bit strange. So he's in like a suit, and he's talking to Alana, who I guess we're not going to see Margot anymore because Alana's now working in the institution. He basically sits with Alana, so he says something in French and about the drink he's drinking, and basically Alana asks how she found him in Florence. He says it was a betrayal of good taste, and he says he has a good taste around him when he's sitting in a cell in an institution in his daily life. She says it's an itch easy enough to scratch when there's cause to celebrate. She congratulates him and says he's officially insane, and he's really not. I mean, remember, he turned himself in, and she knows he's not insane. He says there's no consensus in the psychiatric community what he should have determined. She says they've long been regarded by the psychiatrists as something totally other. And she says she doesn't defy categorization, and he asks if she still prefers drinking wine, and she says she stopped drinking beer after she found out what was put in hers, and basically she says he's being spared the federal death sentence. They had enough to convict him a dozen times over. Then he brings up Mason Verger. And this I thought was pretty funny because he's taking credit for it, but as we know, Alana was the real person that killed him. He's like, "You're welcome." And she's like, "No, you're welcome." That was really funny. There was actually some really great dark humor in this episode, which I really love. That's something Hannibal does great, is the dark humor. Basically, she says the needle was guaranteed, but he beat it all on an insanity plea. We then see that this is just in his mind. In reality, he's sitting in his cell, and she's sitting away from him at a table drinking wine, talking to him. And that I thought was really well done, the way they handled that when we saw that, this is just a mind palace. And she says she knows he's not insane, a dozen people have died, and he tells her she hasn't. She says it's because of a promise he had to keep, which, again, remember, he promised her he'd never kill her. And he reiterates he always keeps them. Francis then stares at the broken mirror, and he says something that has to do with the painting. And again, no lines here. He starts acting like kind of like cannibalistic, and it's just insane. He takes the earplugs, he looks confused, looks at his reflection in the mirror, and he then sees himself in the woods, bloody and battered. And why this is, we don't know. But what I love about these scenes is that they're just so interesting, and you're so interested in finding out more about this guy. Even though you know what's going to happen to him, you're so creeped out by it, and I loved it. So Hannibal talks to Chilton. Yes, Chilton finally is back, which I'm happy about. I don't know where he went. He had that scene with Mason, and then he just kind of disappeared. But now he's back, and I love Chilton in this episode. Oh my god, he's back to his, he's back to his self-centered self that doesn't really give a shit about anyone but himself, and that's the Chilton that we love. Really, it is. Really, that's why we love Chilton. So Hannibal talks to Chilton about the desert, and about the dessert he has prepared for the two of them. And Chilton then discusses his book that he has written, and he says he's writing another book, but not about Hannibal, because the first book he wrote was about Hannibal. And basically, he says the novelty of Hannibal Lecter has waned, and he says his book is about the Tooth Fairy. He says folks are a lot more interested in him, aka Francis, that's who the Tooth Fairy is. And basically, he is the debutante, though he lacks Hannibal's love of presentation. And Hannibal says he's more of a shy boy, and Chilton asks what his thoughts are. He says he doesn't like to be called the Tooth Fairy. He says it's a better name than Hannibal the Cannibal. And I love how he's just trying to make Hannibal seem like, oh, you're nothing compared to him. He's better than you. It was actually pretty funny. He says he has a much wider demographic than Hannibal does. He has fancy illusions and aesthetics. He will always have the appeal. And he says the Tooth Fairy kills whole families in their homes and strikes up the very core of the American dream. He says he's a fork watcher killer. Lana tells, and basically he's a fork watcher killer. So then we realize that Alana and Chilton are both working in the same building, and this I thought was really interesting because she tells Chilton to get out of his chair. He's sitting in her chair, and she's like, "Get out of my chair." That was really funny. He asks if they should have joined hands in the prayer of gratitude. He says a prayer about bringing Hannibal to them. And again, he doesn't realize that Hannibal surrendered, and he says Hannibal will spend the rest of his life in an institution watching the diaper guard go by, and she says he wrote a book of lies, and he says it's not difficult to see lies flying above his head, but it's almost impossible to shoot them down. She says Hannibal will shoot them down, and he says everything Hannibal writes is about a problem he does not have, and she says what he's written is going to be his problem, and it's not so much an article as a rebuttal. And he says it's hard to believe an inmate's opinion won't count for anything in the professional community, but she says it will count, it will sting. And she asks what they talked about, and he brings up the Tooth Fairy, and he says she should be cautious, and basically because Francis might inspire Hannibal to keep himself interesting, and that I thought was definitely very interesting. So Francis watches this short film that traumatizes him. There's this weird high-pitched noise, though, and he can't stop hearing it, and he tries to stop it, but it only makes the film go faster and the noise get louder. And Hannibal looks at a newspaper article on the Tooth Fairy, which Francis is looking at as well, and he sees his book filled with newspaper articles. He opens it up, and there's a painting of the Red Dragon, tons of articles about Hannibal, and he gives the Tooth Fairy article, he basically glues the Tooth Fairy article into the book, and Hannibal is then writing a note to someone. We don't know who he's writing this note to, but that I thought was definitely very interesting. And then we get to by far my favorite part of this episode, which had to be Will's character. I mean, I've loved Will's character before, but this is by far the best arc I think they have ever done with Will. I love Will's storyline in this. It is pretty fantastic, and Hugh Dancy in this episode, just amazing. The way they handle this episode as well, I love the way it was structured, because the first half was all Hannibal, and the second half was all Will, and the way they handled it I thought was great. So, because again, they need to catch up on what's going on. So Will's working outside on the farm that he and his family now own, and Jack comes up to him and he gives him hot chocolate, and he asks if he wants to talk inside, and you can tell that Will wants nothing to do with Jack. Jack being there is kind of like Will's worst nightmare, because he wants nothing to do with him. He wants to be far away from him. He really wants absolutely nothing to do with Jack, and I like seeing that. I thought that was definitely very interesting. So basically, he says the cold shouldn't stop what common sense couldn't. And he says he doesn't want to talk about this anywhere. He doesn't want anything to do with him. He just doesn't want to be involved with police anymore, because he's retired from the FBI. And that's the story that we all know, that, Will's retired from the FBI. He now has a wife, Molly, and a son, Walter. And basically, he just wants nothing to do with Jack, because he's moved on. I mean, after the attack that he went through, it's understandable why he wants nothing to do with Jack. That's perfectly fine. And he asks how much he knows about the Tooth Fairy, and Will tells him what he knows. Jack asks if he thought about calling him, and he says he didn't call him because he didn't want to. He doesn't think that he could be any use to him, and he doesn't think he can do it anymore. He really doesn't want to do this anymore because he knows what it's going to do to him. He doesn't want to go through that whole, this is my design shit. He doesn't want to go through that. So Jack then changes right away to the subject of the Tooth Fairy. He's not going to let Will say no, basically. You can tell that he's not going to take no for an answer. So he gives Will more information, and basically Will realizes how persistent he is. He decides to invite Jack in, and we meet Will's wife, Molly, who I loved Molly's character, I have to say. I hope we see more of her, because I really liked her in this episode. Because Molly talks about the stray dogs that they have, and people drop small dogs there all the time. She goes to keep the cute one, the rest stay and get to be big ones. You can really see that Will pretty much has, like, the ideal lifestyle. I mean, he has this really great wife and this son that really is, you know, supporting him and everything. And it pretty much is this great, he finally has a calm life, and it's great. And Will says she's a sucker for strays, and Jack says he has a nice life there, and Will says he's lucky. Walter goes to take the dogs out. Will says he is 11, and Jack says he'll be taller than him. Will goes with Walter, and Molly then realizes that despite, now basically we get this great scene with Molly and Jack. This scene I really loved here. Because Molly realizes despite what Will says, Jack will take him anyway. He says he has to lie, and Will promise to make it as easy on, and basically he will promise to make it as easy on him as he can. And he says he knows what he's asking, and there's no doubt about that. And he shows her a picture, basically shows her this something, we don't know what it is, and Molly, basically, Will's getting into bed, and Molly decides to talk to him about it, which I like what Molly says to him. I like that she wasn't just like, flat out no. Because I thought what this was going to be that Molly was keeping him from doing this, and that he'd have to choose between Molly and the FBI. And no, that's not the case at all. In fact, she wants him to do this, and I love how great of a wife she is. I mean, finally, Will has someone who's not putting him down, someone who he can actually trust that is a good person, isn't some serial killer, and it's not giving him these crazy thoughts. You see that he's not really thinking about being a serial killer at all. It's very different, and I love it. So Molly says if he stays and there's more killings, it might sour the place for him, and I do agree with that it might make him feel terrible, and he asks if she wants him to go, and she says she would have the satisfaction that he did the right thing, and he says if he goes, he'll be different when he gets back, and she says she won't, she'll be there for him, and I love that. So basically, he has a really tough decision to make. Does he want to go back, or is he gonna just stay with his wife? And I mean, she brings up some really good points here. So he wakes up in the middle of the night and looks at basically this yellow folder of stuff that Jack gave to him, which contains a note, and it's from Hannibal. And we realize who Hannibal was writing that note to, was to Will. And basically, and I love what Hannibal says, because pretty much sums up this episode. He says they've all found a new life, but all lurking in the shadows. And soon enough, he fears Jack will come looking, and he will encourage him not to step back from the door he holds open. It's dark on the other side, and madness is waiting. And basically, he's telling him, look, don't go back into this life. And he then sees the article about the Tooth Fairy Massacre, puts it into the fireplace, and you don't know what he's going to do, but he watches it burn to ash, and basically, he returns to Buffalo, New York, and then you know what he's going to do. So, he goes into the house of the family that was killed to investigate, and sees 2 little boys dead from Francis, then sees a mother dead too, and all of them are numbered, and then he sees the broken mirror the broken mirror, and there's one room that has blood covering the walls. He looks to report the FBI, and then he starts seeing Francis' design. And finally, I love how we got back to this, because one of the best parts of this entire show is Will going into this thing where he can see all the designs. It's awesome to watch, and basically, I loved this scene. I mean, it just felt like classic Hannibal. It was awesome. Basically, he sees the crime scene unfold right before his eyes. He imagines himself as the Tooth Fairy, killing the family, seeing exactly what he did. He first slashes the husband's throat and shoots his wife, Mrs. Leeds. He then shoots one of the boys in bed, but the other is pulled from under his bed and shoots him from the floor. The Mr. Leach tries to protect his children, but he loves him too, but he loses too much blood and falls and dies outside his son's room. And the family was then put back where they killed, and he broke the mirror with their body parts. And really, really crazy stuff, guys. Really disgusting stuff, but I really love that scene, I'd say. I mean, it was really, really graphic stuff, but I really love that because now we are finally back to seeing Will's design. I mean, it's one of the best parts of the show is seeing those designs that Will always has, and the way they did that in this episode I thought was fantastic. I really love that, I have to say. So, basically, of course, this is my design. By far, probably my favorite scene in the episode was that scene. I love that. So Jimmy meets up with... Jimmy's back. Jimmy and Brian are back. And I forgot about their characters completely. But yeah, Jimmy and Brian are back. And basically he meets up with someone who gives him the report of the bodies found. And Jimmy says he needs to have one reasonably intelligent assistant if he has one. And of course, Brian comes in and says he can help him. He's trying to reconstruct teeth from the bite marks on Mrs. Leitz and a cheddar cheese wheel that they found. And Jimmy, meanwhile, is trying to find exactly where the glass was placed. And basically, Jimmy finds glass in Mrs. Lee's eye, and he welcomes Will back. Then he finds glass in her mouth and also her labia, which it basically tells us that he probably raped her. But I like the way the show kind of, like, avoids not saying it straight out, because Brian Fuller says he doesn't like to do rape, and he says the way he likes to do it is a lot more subtle. And I really like the way it was handled here because, yeah, they don't say that he was raped. They just say that, you know, they don't say that she was raped. They just say, oh, he put glass in her labia, and I thought that was well done. So, one, her mouth was secured by blood, and Will says it might be a fighting pattern. And I love the part where Jimmy just paused and he's like, oh, I can't believe that you're back. It was really funny because he can't believe that Will actually returned to the FBI. So Will says it might be a fighting pattern as much as sexual behavior, and Jack asks what he's fighting, and Francis continues, and then we see Francis again, he continues to hear the high-pitched noise that irritates him, then we see a vial with teeth in it, and it's probably the dentures that he purchased, and Will's in a motel, he's trying to call Molly, he's not getting an answer, he lies down and has all these visions about the Leitz family, and just, it's pretty crazy. So Jack then tells Will that the dog was not killed, and he tells him not to worry about it and tells him to do the best he can. Will says he can wait till he's driven to it by desperation, by the full moon, or do it now. And Jack asks if there's an opinion he wants, and he says it's a mindset he needs to recover. And you realize that he's talking about Hannibal, and that's awesome, the way they handle this the way they end this episode was great. He basically realizes that he has to see Hannibal, because that's what he's recovering from. And he knows that if he sees Hannibal, it's going to be relief for him, it's going to be a relief for Hannibal. He goes into the asylum, they greet each other, and basically we get the great exchange between, hello, Dr. Lecter, hello, Will, and that's basically how the episode ends. And that was awesome. I love the ending. What an incredible episode. Seriously, this episode was amazing. I loved it. So much to get into, though, that I really do want to talk about. I mean, something I love at this episode, it really did feel like a season premiere, and I love that. A lot of people have talked about this, that this episode really did feel like a season premiere, and it really did, I have to say. I really got that vibe from this episode, and I really love that. So let's talk a little bit more about this episode. So, Francis. What is Francis exactly going to do here? We haven't had one line from him. Obviously, he's becoming the Tooth Fairy. What caused him to do this? We don't know. What connection does the Great Red Dragon have to the Tooth Fairy? Obviously, he's going to become the Red Dragon, but how does that go with the Tooth Fairy? That's what I'm definitely wondering, is what's going to happen with that. That definitely is going to be very interesting. Alana and Chilton, I like them working together in this asylum. I think that definitely is very interesting. Is Chilton's next book going to be about the Tooth Fairy? That's something I'm definitely wondering. Now, Will. I love what they're doing with Will's character. Will and Hannibal, I cannot wait to see what happens between these two. I mean, obviously, it's going to be awkward. It's going to be awkward. He hasn't seen him in 3 years. It's not going to be something that Will's looking forward to, but he knows he had to do this, and he basically had no choice but to do this, and their first interaction is something I cannot wait to see, is what's going to happen between these two. What are they going to say to each other? How's this all going to turn out? I mean, it's going to be incredible to see what ends up happening with that. There are a few characters I don't think we're going to see anymore. Chayo, I think, is done. Bedelia, I don't think we're going to see ever again. She's still in Florence, so I don't think we're ever going to see her again. I love seeing Jimmy and Brian work together again. It was really funny stuff. I really loved their scenes together. They were pretty hilarious, I have to say. I love, because they really brought back some of the great humor in the show, because the show can be very funny at times, and a lot of that is due to Jimmy and Brian, and this show really did a great job of doing that. Definitely really love that. Let's talk about Molly, because obviously Molly says she'll come back, Will will be a different person. Is this going to affect Will in a bad way? I mean, is Will going to feel relieved after this? I kind of feel like him meeting up with Hannibal is kind of like him healing himself from feeling the way he is, and if that's true, I think that definitely is very interesting to see what's going to happen with that. Um, Hannibal, obviously, he's going to be released from the institution at some point. We're going to see what happens with that. Obviously, he's going to work with Will on the Tooth Fairy. But I can't wait to see the first interaction between Hannibal and the Tooth Fairy, because Hannibal doesn't seem that bothered by the Tooth Fairy, honestly. He doesn't seem that bothered. He thinks that he's just as bad as him. But I think that the Tooth Fairy is even more powerful than Hannibal. We'll have to see what ends up happening between Hannibal and Francis. That definitely is going to be very interesting, I have to say. I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, definitely am interested in seeing what's going to happen with that. The Leets family as well. I like finding out more about the Leets family. Who is the next family that Francis is going to go after? I mean, obviously we haven't seen it. One of the things I like is that we haven't seen it on camera. It's been set to the imagination. We only see it from Will's point of view, which is something I always loved about the show, is the way they handle that. Is Jack going to be able to help out Will? Obviously, you can tell that Will is worried about what he's doing and doesn't really know if he can do this anymore. That's something I'm definitely interested in seeing. What's going to happen between Jack and Will. That definitely is going to be very interesting. But that's really it, guys. That's all I have to say about this episode. I know that this was a pretty short review, but this was definitely more of a transition episode. It was more of, here's what happened, here's what's going to happen in the rest of the show now. Here's what we're going to focus on, and here's where all the characters have been the last 3 years. I love the way they catched up with them. I thought that was really great, especially with Hannibal and Will. The way they handled that, I thought was just fantastic. One of the best episodes of the season by far. This is going to be, I can tell the second half of the season. I mean, I'm treating this as its own season. I'm counting it, it's still season 3, but I'm counting it as, like, season 3B. It's like, if the show was to go from a hiatus, it's gone from that hiatus and is now basically back, and I really do love that. Margot's gone too, I'm assuming. I don't think we're going to see Margot again. We'll have to see Bedelia Chayo. Do you think we're going to see them again? I hope we see Bedelia and Chayo again, because they were such a big part of the story in the first round, and I love what they did with them, that I hope we see them again in the second half. But I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what ends up happening for the rest of the season. It's going to be incredible. I can't wait for it. I'm already loving it. That's basically my review. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you guys saw this episode. I love this episode. And we'll see you guys in my next video, which will be my review for another classic movie review. And I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.